speaker for today, Advocate Puneet Agarwal ji, who will give his deliberations on how to handle GST notice and summons under assessments. So, as you all know, CGPI is a national level alliance consisting of in service and practicing chartered accountants, lawyers, company secretaries, and CMAs who are focused primarily into GST. CGPI main objective is to arrange the indirect tax community into one common body so that a unified body can stand up for the interest of all the professional community as well as trade and industries with respect to GST. Through CGPI, we aim to create a platform of knowledgeable GST professionals of each state, city, and local area. And we wish to bring them all under same community or a common platform. For the benefits of new participants, we would like to inform the objective of CGPI. Firstly, the objective of CGPI is to focus and to enrich the knowledge in the field of GST only for all its stakeholders. CGPI is providing a national level platform and has been aligned with the Trade and Industry Association to take up their issues and representations at the appropriate authority. In addition, the zone, that is no zone, would further endeavor to understand the local industries issues in GST for addressing that to the appropriate authority. I sincerely appeal to all the participants who are not the members to CGPI to become the members of CGPI, as there are certain benefits which are attached only with the membership. Firstly, members get to participate in the intensive study sessions which are held on weekends. Objective of these intensive study sessions is to decode the GST law clause by clause. Recording of the intensive study sessions is also made available to our members through a login portal. Secondly, there are benefits with regards to the paper presentations which are written and which are presented by the experienced GST professionals on various interpretational issues and various hot topics. These papers would help the members in understanding the topic in depth and also would help them in framing the show cause notice and also to represent with the GST authorities. Thirdly, there are also webinars which are related to the various hot topics through advanced rulings, through notifications, through circulars, whatever the case may be, which are specifically accessible only to the members of CGPI. In addition, CGPI members would have a login ID wherein all the webinars, wherein all the knowledge sharings are recorded under a knowledge platform. CGPI is providing a national level platform and has been also aligning with the trade and industry associations to take up the issues and representations at the appropriate authority. This will definitely help industry a lot. Keeping in view the above mentioned benefits, which are exclusive to the members, we highly recommend participants to take the membership of CGPI. I sincerely hope that today's session would be very informative and knowledgeable as this has been presented by one of our learned speakers, Mr. Puneet Agarwal. Now I hand over the dice to Ms. Archana Janji to introduce about our speaker for today.
Thank you, Pitam sir, and thank you so much for giving a brief introduction of the forum, its vision and its mission. On as well as a professional like me. So thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation and giving your consent to be present on this platform today and enlightening our members on a very critical topic that you are going to deliberate today. So I'll just share the brief profile of Puneet sir. Puneet sir, a graduate from Shriram College of Commerce, qualified chartered accountant, and a lawyer by profession. He has a rich experience of more than 15 years in the field of taxation as well as legal services. He possesses extensive knowledge and strong command on the subject, has successfully handled and represented varied matters on indirect taxation, GST, service tax, VAT, and custom excise, etc. Puneet sir has been privileged to represent one of the biggest bar association of Asia, and that is Saletex Bar Association, before the Delhi High Court on the matters relating to GST and glitches. After that only we have seen so many changes and so many circulars and notifications. So thank you so much, sir, for your hard work. Because of this, we all are being benefited. He's also represented Bharatiya Vitt Salahkar Samiti, a highly acclaimed think tank of finance and accounting professionals, before the Delhi High Court, and has tried to contribute towards development of more robust GST tribunal system in India. As far as his work experience is concerned, so I can just show this is whole of his work experience. So he's has a vast experience of not only handling indirect taxation matters relating to constitution and other important matters also at various forums, including the Apex Court, Supreme Court of India. Because of him, I'll just share one of the few important judgments that has led to many changes in the GST regime. And the most important and the recent one is in the matter of Pitambara books, which has led to the issuance of circular where the merging of two financial year has been allowed by GSTN. And similarly, in the case of Jagriti Plastics, where input tax credit available on DEP scripts has been allowed by Delhi High Court, and Jash Plastic, where it has been a remarkable judgment where colon has been defined and all these the contribution, all the credit goes to Puneet sir only. So I'll take much of the time. I know, sir, it is very difficult to give a brief introduction also in the time frame allowed to me, but I'll not be an hindrance. And welcome once again, sir. All the podium belongs to you now, sir. Thank you so much.
First of all, I thank CGPI for inviting me, and to Archana ji for being so gracious in introducing me. But let me tell you one thing, ma'am, that a professional belongs to the professionals, and the success of professional can never be his own. It is always a community which succeeds. So after completing 15 years in the profession of, or rather being a chartered accountant, because I became a lawyer in 2009, I would say that I owe 100% of whatever I have done to the profession of chartered accountancy and the fellow chartered accountants who have always been guiding me, who have always been helping me, and all the seniors who have always given me so much love. So first of all, I thank the whole professional community for standing with us professionals and helping us wherever we have reached. And I hope that with the continuous support, we all will scale new heights. And ma'am, what better occasion can be than these trying times where everyone is trying to just find out that and figure out that what is the or where rather where the future lies. And I think that professionals have really done a commendable job in upgrading themselves, in improving their skills. And one thing which I always feel is that learning is something which should always continue. And change is something which is permanent. So the only thing they say which is permanent is change. So if ultimately change is permanent, then why not change for the good? So I hope and pray to the Almighty that whatever changes occur in these and because of these trying times, it is for the good of the humanity and it is for the good of everyone. With this note, a very good evening to all the dear professional seniors. Namaskar to all the younger colleagues, and lots of love from my side, from Delhi, to the participants throughout the length and breadth of the country. The topic today is really an interesting one. And today I would not like to discuss any provision of law. I would not like to discuss any specific jargons of law. Rather, I would like to discuss what has been my experience over the last 15 years in this field, which is purely legal. And whatever I would be discussing today, and I have prepared a very short presentation of 5-7 slides, or rather 10-12 slides maybe, where I would like to discuss that what is the process which a professional should follow when he is replying to a notice. It may be a notice in the form of a show cause notice. It may be a notice which may be asking for some details. It may be a preliminary show cause notice. It may be a notice of any type. And in fact, let me say so that it may be a notice which is issued under any law. The process remains the same. There is no great difference in it. And if we follow the process diligently, step after step, every time. In fact, when we used to ask Mr. Lakshmi Kumaran, who is my boss, who has been my boss and who has been my mentor, he used to say that I have read this section 4 at least 5,000 times. And whenever the matter would again come on section 4, I will again read it. The section 4 that I am referring to is the valuation provision under the Central Excise Law. And a hallmark of any good legal professional is that he is not obsessed by his memory of remembering what a section means. For my experience, which has been a very little experience, but whatever I have learned, so I am discussing whatever I have learned in this short period of 15 years, has been that whenever a professional looks at a provision of law in the context of the facts which he is dealing with, he gets new answers, he gets new interpretations, he gets new meanings. And you all would agree, you are all seasoned professionals, that law is not something which is just a black letter written on a white piece of paper. Rather, it's a living organism, a being which is organic in nature and which derives its color from the text and the context in which it is being discussed. For every provision of law which we are interpreting at a relevant moment of time or a relevant point in time, it would always derive its meaning from the underlying facts which are being discussed. And gone are the days when constitutionalities were being challenged on larger questions without there being in facts, or rather without there being any underlying facts. Nowadays, the courts say that we will not decide an issue in vacuum. If you ask the classical lawyers, the classical writ lawyers, the classical constitutional lawyers, they would say completely diametrically opposite thing, and they would say that constitutionalities are to be challenged on absolutes. So a person who wants to challenge constitutionality of a provision need to demonstrate that in no sense is this provision constitutional, and therefore there is no need for there being any facts. But the experience nowadays has completely changed, and even those constitutional lawyers, they have changed their I would say their view. As I mentioned, law is something which is organic in nature. It evolves with the times. It has to adjust with the times. It has to adjust with the needs. Gone are the days when Supreme Court used to have judges who used to have time deciding cases, sitting in constitutional benches, writing beautiful pieces of decisions and judgments which are relevant even today. Now, even the Supreme Court is flooded with hundreds and thousands of cases. And therefore, deciding constitutional matters has almost taken a backseat. Important matters like, let's not get into that. Important matters also often are not decided because they may not be very pressing. So what are the issues that gain immediate attention? Either they are issues of political importance, or they are issues which are otherwise very, very relevant to the time, which really get the attention of the courts. So if you are wanting to get any issue decided in vacuum, even though it relates to constitutionality, that has become a challenge now. So therefore, in this context, let me just present a short presentation. It is completely practical, and I will try to show what, according to me, should be the steps which we should take in handling the notices. And as I mentioned, it's a general list which you can apply to any law, any notice, any issue which is raised under any law. And I will keep giving examples and illustrations as we go across the list. Many of you may find it a base for having your own checklist. So this can be used maybe as a starting point, and you all can keep improvising on this checklist. And friends, let me say this very candidly, that I also have not got this checklist. Only when I am asked to talk on this issue is that I am able to pen down my thoughts in form of this, which therefore I am saying it is not infallible, it is not complete, it is not exhaustive. It is just indicative, demonstrating whatever I have learned over the years responding to the notices and challenging those notices in various forums. So the first thing which should always be done is that we should study the allegations. What are the allegations in the notice? What is it saying? What does it want from us? Is it a notice pertaining to short payment of tax? Is it a notice which is saying that you have not filed the returns, therefore I'm going to cancel your registration? Is it a notice that alleges that you have not declared your turnover? Is it a notice that says that you have not declared your tax liability correctly, the rate of tax is not correct, there is undervaluation? Find out what is the exact allegation. What does it want? What is it saying that you have wrong done? And that whatever he is saying, is it based upon some facts or is it in air? Many times there are many authorities. If all those friends who have been practicing on the central laws side, like central excise, customs, service tax, GST now, you would find that the notices that are issued under these laws are really detailed. Many times one would wonder whether it is a notice or is it an order where he has already decided and he is giving a complete picture of it. But that is the real way in which show cause notices should be issued. But if you see the state authorities or the authorities like municipal authorities, etc., they have the habit of issuing notices which are completely bereft of any details. And if I may share one or two notices which I have actually seen. In UP, if you go and if you want to see the notices issued under the Stamp Act, you would find they would simply say, and since these notices typically are in Hindi, therefore I'm repeating that in our mother tongue, and they would say, आपकी संपत्ति का निरीक्षण किया गया और पाया गया कि आपने 25,57,550 रुपए कम स्टाम्प शुल्क अदा किया है, क्यों ना आपके ऊपर कर की देयता ब्याज समेत 10 गुना शास्ति के साथ आरोपित की जाए। ऐसा आपके पास नोटिस एक आ जाएगा। अब now you do not know what is in his mind. Why is he saying? You would think I had paid 1 crore, I had paid stamp duty 10%. Why is he saying that this is a short payment of 25 lakh rupees? I do not know. I have no idea. So then the standard practice here is you rush to the authority, you pay some money to the Babu, and you get the copy of the file where he would have noted some 2-3 lines based upon which he thinks that. But this is not the way our central taxes have really developed. So the first thing which you need to find out is, or rather the second in this bullet, what are the basic facts referred in the notice which forms the foundation for issuance of notice? Because if there are no facts, then the first reply which we need to give is that what is the facts on which you are alleging short payment? Do you have any facts? Please share with us so that we can give an effective reply. For example, you remember early 80s and all, telephone connection was a luxury, and people used to approach the MPs and MLAs of their area to get phone connected, and the junior telecom officers who used to have some powers of connection and disconnection used to be some of the most powerful people in the area, and they used to disconnect the telephones just like that. They used to simply give notices, show cause as to why your disconnection, your phone should not be disconnected. Now, in that context, the Madhya Pradesh High Court once quashed that notice, saying that it is completely bereft of any details. You at least tell us what is your allegation against the person who is using the telephone. This is no notice at all. You may be issuing a notice saying it is a notice. You may be proposing an action, but what is the basis of that action? And until you tell and communicate that action to the other person, what is that the other person is going to reply to? He'll not be able to reply to anything unless you put him on notice what facts you are alleging. And in fact, interestingly, just to put forth under GST, they have actually provided a beautiful section 75, which has also covered these steps. So in section 75, which talks about general provisions relating to determination of tax, they have given certain principles as to what are the basic requirements with a show cause notice. So, and also the order, etc. So, as I mentioned, I'm not going into much details of the law, because these are the basic principles, and even the law only encapsulate these basic principles. So the second issue that I mentioned was that basic facts must be referred, and if they are not referred, you are not duty bound to really respond in great detail. The first reply which should go is, and that's what I am discussing those steps, the first reply in such a situation should be that the proposed action is based upon no facts averred in the notice. Kindly let us know what is the basis for your averment so that we can effectively file a reply. And in such cases, your prayer should be very clear. Give all those facts so that we can reply. Second prayer should be, do not take any adverse action without granting us sufficient opportunity after you hand over the facts to us. And in any case, grant us a opportunity of being heard, so that if he takes any action, then that can be amenable to jurisdiction of the higher forums, either the appellate or the writ court, because in that case he would be grossly misusing, and in such like cases the chances of success in the writ court also becomes very high if he still passes an order without giving you any facts. The third thing is, what is the exact action that he proposes in the notice? Find that out. Be very clear. Don't assume. Be very clear on what is the action he has proposed in the notice. So he may allege that you have underpaid, but the action he may propose is to cancel the registration. Or the action can be to impose penalty. The action can be to impose tax. So what exactly is his allegation? Ordinarily, except interest, which many cases has been made automatic, either by the statute or by the decisions of the court, it has been held that issuance of show cause notice in respect of that particular addition, either tax, interest, penalty, cancellation, whatever action is to be taken is sine qua non. So there may be an allegation, but what is the effect which the authority wants to give to that allegation? Be very, very careful on that and reply only that. You are not required to go beyond that. So that if he passes an order beyond what has been contemplated, you can always challenge it in the next level, saying that this was not even the proposal in the show cause notice. And please notice that a show cause notice is a stator document. It's the starting document. It's the basic document which gives the jurisdiction to the authority to take whatever action he is proposing. And if he has not proposed an action and he still goes ahead and take that action, that is fundamental violation of the principles of natural justice. So he is going beyond the show cause notice, and there are empty number of Supreme Court decisions in indirect tax jurisprudence that if he goes beyond the show cause notice, that is all bad. Therefore, it's very important to restrict yourself. First, identify what is the exact action and then take action accordingly. Then make your reply accordingly. Then take suitable legal action accordingly. So you have to be very careful on these three aspects of the notice. study of notice, I must tell you, dear friends, is the art. It's a science and an art. And the art part of it is something more than what is contained in the legal provisions. So we must, on one hand, be very clear of the legal provisions. Secondly, we must be very clear of the settled legal position in respect of reading of the notices, what kind of view the courts ordinarily take in respect of actions proposed or actions taken, what is beyond what was proposed, etc. So all these things again gain a lot of importance. Once you have gone through the facts, the government's allegations and the proposed action, we have to, as I mentioned, we should again see the legal provisions which have been invited by the department. So if the department says that these are the legal provisions that gets attracted, read them very carefully. And I'm saying this with a lot of, I would say, responsibility. Read them like a nursery child, as if you have never read it, and that would give you the real new insights. So if we think, for myself, I'm saying, if I think that I know this, then I am bound to make mistakes. But if I think that no, let me read this provision once again, then it gives me novel thought. It gives me new ideas as to how to respond to the notice. So it's very important to read the sections. And please note that this GST law is like a hedge maze. You don't know which particular place is connected to which other provision. There are huge number of interrelationships. So you need to figure out particular section which he is referring to. What are the connected rules? What are the connected notifications? Because notification after notification and amended notification after the previous one, new notification after the amended one. So all these things are happening, which is leading and making the GST law a very complicated piece of legislation. And I am telling you very clearly, at least I am till now unable to follow all the GST provision. Many of you might be able to really remember that what all are the related provisions. But for me, I would say I always prefer going through all the related sections which are related to that provision, all the related rules and the notifications. Then the next is, as if the law itself, CGST Act, IGST Act, SGST Act, UTGST, compensation, and all the state GSTs, as if this was not enough. The complete operationalization of this law is being done through the circulars and clarifications. And every now and then board is issuing new circulars, new instructions, and creating more and more confusion. In fact, if you look at their FAQs, many times you will find their circulars are directly contrary to the FAQ. Their own circulars have started to supersede the previous circulars. Their own circulars have started to rewrite the previous paragraphs in the previous circulars. So it's a complete mess which the CBIC has created. And I ask myself a question. In the GST law, is the board's function to substitute, number one, the legal provisions with the circulars? Second, is the board's function is to sit and decide all issues in the office of the board without hearing the assessees, without knowing what is the factual situation, without knowing what are the arguments and submissions of the assessees, without knowing what is the view of the other side? It's a very strange kind of a situation where the boards want to decide every question under the sun, which they think the assessing authorities would require to do. And ultimately, the authorities feel more bound by the circulars than the law. And a classic example I can give you is, law says, Rule 97 capital A, please allow manual refunds. Whatever you want, you have to do electronically can be done manually, and it is as effective. Law says so. But none of the authority, without the interference of the High Court, and at least twice. First, you have to get a direction from the High Court, and still they do not do. Then you have to get a second direction from the High Court in the same case, saying unless you do it, we will call the chairman or something. Then alone the assessing authorities process the refunds, and that too after so many different kind of, some authorities would say you file some kind of a electronic application in whichever way you can, and they would give you also. In one of my cases, what they did, They said that, all right, now the court has asked us to decide in this Pitambara case itself. They said, all right, we have been asked to decide the application within 3 days. All right, we'll do it. You file a electronic application under the head of appeals. And they actually asked us, and they made sure that the assessee has to file an application under the head appeals. And under that head, ultimately they issued refund only against an electronic. So therefore, if you see this, circular number 125 is directly and straight away contrary to Rule 97 capital A. Apart from that, you would find there are various instructions saying, for example, I remember one more, where they say if you debit your credit in your books, that means you have reversed that credit, and whatever percentage you have already reversed, that would not be considered for computation under Rule 89. So what I'm trying to say is I'm not getting into the merits of the matter. What I'm saying is, who is the board to decide this? According to me, in my submission, the board has administrative powers. They have no quasi-judicial power to determine any issue. Administrative means they can say, all right, we request the authorities, request is like a direction, to decide all pending applications within 2 months. They may say, all right, rather than having a chartered accountant certificate, you can have this type of document also. Such like thing you can in an administrative capacity, but to decide judicial issues, the issues that arise for determination by quasi-judicial authorities, according to me, it is absolutely wrong. And someday the courts would have to stop the board from continuing to issue, according to me, these illegal circulars which do not fall within their power at all. And for that, I have given 3 judgments. I don't want to really bombard you with the names and all. One of them is Sirpur. I will show you after this, just for showing. It is only for your later consumption that I have put those. But according to me, this we need to therefore also identify, is the department relying on an instruction of the board which is against me? Number 1. Or is there any instruction in my favor? Because if there is an instruction in my favor, then the department is bound by it. So what I will do, I will simply say that please follow this instruction. You are bound to follow this. So that's why I'm saying we need to be, as professionals, the step would be to also identify what are the related circulars. And now there is one more category. One is FAQ. Another category is there are certain orders also issued under the removal of difficulty order, etc. So all these also we need to know what are the, and if they are beneficial, we need to note those. Then another great problem which is arising in GST. Something is to be done as per law. But now there are experts, not on law, experts on GSTN. This system functions like this. For this system, you have to enter like this. For this system, the copy is not available, so you have to take a previous screenshot. A complete mess. So now there are 3 different parallel legislations going on. One is the law, which is sitting idle, which is not of any use, because there are board instructions which are more relevant and which are actually binding on authorities. So authorities go by the boards. And the third is the authorities simply fold their hand and say, I cannot do anything. This GSTN does not allow me, and I cannot do anything manually. So the administrative authorities are now getting a new tool of not deciding the thing, because the GST portal doesn't function. So the next step for a professional is to also know another class of law which I call as GSTN law. So what are the systems and functionalities which are available on the portal? So we had to actually get a decision from the Delhi High Court that GST portal demonstrates on their website what are the functionalities which are still not available. But I'm not too sure that to what extent they are updating it. At that time, yes, they had put that. So GSTN portal, we need to know what is the procedure available. In many cases, for example, I'll give you 3-4 examples. If you have filed a refund application for a month and later on you come to know that for this month some more refund is to be filed, it is very strange. GSTN portal doesn't allow you to file another application. I don't know which law can stop filing of second application for the same period. Or there may be genuine requirements. I have exported certain services and I receive some payment in 1 month. I want to file a claim and I receive payment in another month for the same. I again want to file a claim. How do you file the claim again? You can't. So I just don't go on the merits of the matter. What I'm trying to point out is, likewise, Pitambara, it has been ordered. It has already been 6-7 months. They need 4 months more. They have filed an affidavit in the High Court that we need 2-3 July. It is going on August, September, 2 more months to put on the functionality, and the High Court has recorded it in the Pitambara case itself. So they are not accepting. The officers are not accepting manual claims, and the GST portal is not ready. Where do the assessee goes? Only option is to go to the High Court. So you need to be very clear as to whether GSTN portal is supporting you. Now, in case it is not supporting you, the burden is on you, because their claim always would be, no, our portal is functional. And every time and at every, you call them on any platform, the first data they will give you is, till date 15 crore returns have been filed, 50 crore challans have been processed. All this they will keep saying, and they will never say what is not functioning. So is there any person who today doubts that returns are being filed on GST portal? No, no one doubts. What people say is that either the portal is slow, or they say it only accommodates 1.5 lakh returns, which now they claim to have increased. But the difficulty, wherever it is arising, they never acknowledge, and they always put it on the assessee. So therefore, as a professional, you are required to keep clear copies of the screenshots available on the portal. And there are many things which the portal doesn't allow you to download. They are just, you just have a viewing facility. You may be required to have proper screenshots with the date of the screenshot which arises at the, or which appears at the bottom right corner of the computer screen. The next one is, wherever the portal, for example, is not functioning, or wherever you feel that there is some issue, like the one where portal is not functioning, you want it to be brought to the information of the GST Council, information of the GST network, information of CBIC. Do write representations. And let me tell you, my friends, that writing letters is a very good idea. You may not get answers, but many times you would find that because of your writing to the authorities, they get the necessary feedback. Some people somewhere are really working, and when they catch hold of your clear representations, they make changes. And even if they don't make, you have it documented with you that you had written letters to them. So if you are unable to take some action, for example, let me tell you, you made some mistakes on the portal while filing the returns. Now, GSTR 3B does not give you correction mechanism. It only compels you to correct in the later returns. And what therefore happens is, the later return also become wrong, and the previous return was anyways wrong. Now, in order to avoid negative inquiries, or rather negative implications of the inquiries which will be there tomorrow because of mismatch between your financial data and the returns, and in order to avoid later scrutinies and penalties arising therefrom, it is a very good idea to write to these people explaining that this is the problem that we are facing. Despite the law saying that I have the right to correct, I am unable to correct it in the way I want. And therefore, we request you to kindly provide the facility, and that letter that you have written to these higher-ups would always help you at the time of assessment or at the time of any notice that is issued to you. So this is a preparation that you do either after the issuance of notice, or you do it pre-notice. And let me tell you that whenever you preempt an action, you know that there is a mistake, it needs to be corrected. And ultimately, they will be finding that out in the notice. So it's always better to write from your side. It proves your bona fides. It shows that you were helpless. And in that case, many times what happens is, the systems are so complicated that you may not even be aware that what kind of a system is available on the portal to carry out that function. In that, there may be a bona fide error made by you by not reaching to that place, and therefore you are thinking that you are missing something. But if you have written, you show your bona fide at large that yes, you were trying but you were unable. But that saves you from any punitive action. That holds out your bona fides. So these are becoming very important considerations in replying to GST notices. That's one very important part which I found during the last 2.5, 3 years since GST litigation has picked up. And I'm telling you that this kind of an approach has actually been very, very fruitful, where the courts have really leaned in our favor in many cases, saying that once you had informed and they have not provided a solution, the whole burden has been put on the revenue to correct the whole thing rather than penalizing us for our mistake that we made. And please also see the Punjab Haryana High Court decision in Edford case, which was pertaining to Tran 1, where Honorable Mr. Justice Jaswant Singh has actually stated that it's such a complicated, we are unable to file even simple forms on the portals. So how are we expecting the public at large to follow these right from day one? And that was reiterated by the Delhi High Court. Honorable Mr. Justice Narula authored a beautiful decision judgment in the case of brand equity, which is full of practical insights. And if you look at those very carefully, what have they stated? They have stated that the GST portal has faltered. They have stated that there cannot be two different benchmarks for assessing the performance of the assessee and for assessing the performance of the department. And if department is unable to fulfill what was required on their part, then the assessees cannot be still rated at the same level that you should have been 100% efficient, whereas we are only 40%. We have just the passing marks and you should get 100% marks, else the penalties. So I think that's one very important silver lining. Of course, Supreme Court has stayed, but stay doesn't mean that the decision is not correct. It only shows that at that stage, the Supreme Court finds that the equities are in favor of the government for whatever reasons. So that we have to find out from whatever happens at the end. But the reality is that the courts are actually in the know of the things that GSTN is unable to perform the way they should have performed. But the worst part is that the GSTN does not really realize that what they are doing is in the worst interest of the trade, in the worst interest of the profession, and they are actually ruining the trade by not consulting the trade enough. And in fact, whenever the Sales Tax Bar Association, because all those cases we have been very closely associated, has tried to tell them that this is the problem, I am very sorry to say and really pained to say that wherever there were real, genuine issues that were raised, they were brushed aside under the carpet, either by saying that the technology takes time to correct it, or by giving some excuses which are not, I would say, acceptable at all. The pragmatic approach which should have been there in correcting. So wherever the High Court actually came down heavily and directed them to do something, except those cases, we have not really found anything worthwhile, or rather a pragmatic approach where the GSTN would have acted more like a profession. So what GSTN has to act is, they have to understand that they are a body which is service provider. GSTN is not an authority. GSTN is a service provider. If they would have actually considered the needs of those to whom they have provided the service, if they would have considered the commercial realities of the whole system, and if then they would have framed the system, and if they would have kept their eyes and ears more open, I'm not saying they're totally closed, but if they would have kept those more open, then probably the results would have been better. Now it is in front of us where except filing the writ petitions, it's like you are fighting with a box which cannot open. There is no entry to it. So that is how GSTN is. Therefore, the need for representation so that the matters can be taken higher ups. But here I would say that the associations like CGPI have a lot of role to play. You also must figure out and decide in your governing body what kind of representations are required, and those short, crisp representations on different issues should keep going. So if all India bodies, bar associations, chartered accountant associations, if they keep writing, it really gives a lot of feedback to the government, even if they are not taking action on any of them. But when they get a lots of them, they really get to know that there is some problem. And I've seen changes being made with those representations. The next one is, this is one of the very, very important thing, which I have found is one of the single most important factor if you want to win cases. And I will give you a few examples. Identify the facts after detailed discussion with the client, but with a caveat, and after seeing the document yourself. In most of the cases, when you have first cut discussion with your client, most of them are not able to remain dispassionate while discussing. Most of the clients, not malafide, I'm not saying they're malafide, but they're biased with their case. They feel obsessed with their case. They feel attached with their case. It is like a doctor doing his own surgery or his own family member's surgery. So what happens is, you need to first understand what is he saying. You have to question him and cross-question him, and then see the documents of what he's saying. And then, if you kindly see, I have mentioned 4 or 5 important factors after that. Consider obtaining certificates from chartered accountant relating to data. Consider issuing or getting technical, architectural, building scientific information, obtaining certificates or opinions from experts, and discuss with the client's technical experts. Many a times what happens is, the client's financial people talk to you. Just give me a second. My battery is running out, so I have to. So have discussion with the technical experts of the client. Have discussion with the business people of the client. Many times the financial people are unable to give proper information. The legal people are unable to give complete information. And when it comes to commodity and service taxation, it is extremely important that we actually find out what is the nature of the commodity. We find out what is the actual service that is being rendered. We find out what is the commercial reality around it. We find out what are the contracts around it. We find out how it is invoiced in the real world. We find out how customers understand it, what is their use, all those things. It is extremely, extremely important. So before proceeding with matter, I can only suggest what I do. I never go by what the client orally tells. I note it down very carefully. I ask him 100 questions. Unless he answers and satisfies me on facts, I am telling you, I never start a brief. I never start drafting. I never allow teams to start drafting. The facts, and I can tell you that in 80% of the cases, what the client tells initially turns out to be incorrect. In most of the cases, he is unable to make out his case properly. In some of the cases, he might not be able to even translate the facts properly. From our perspective, we need to understand what the unbiased facts are. This is key to replying any notice. Facts are to be understood, and relevant facts are to be understood completely. And please see it as a story. For a lawyer, every case is like a story. You need to build a story around it. You need to complete the chain. If you break the chain somewhere in between, your representation is not adequate. You need to you need to have every answer in your mind. You need not be required to look at the client and ask him. If judge asks you any question, you should act as if you know the business in and out. And therefore, knowledge of the facts, backed up with the documents, backed up with evidences, is extremely important. Then comes the legal expertise of finding out the relevant case laws. And if there is a direct case law, there is no substitute to it. There is no, I don't think there is any requirement of a discussion on this point. But let me tell you one thing, that the best of the case laws which completely cover your client against him, you can find answers by distinguishing the facts. Therefore, never give up. Find out what the basis of that judgment was. Find out what the facts in that decision was. And let me tell you, my friends, in not one but in several cases, we have been successful in such like cases where everyone thought that there is a case against us, and we were able to tell the court that, look, you have not even considered that what my product is. Please see what my product is. And in many cases, we have been very, very successful only because We found out, we went to the core of the product, we went to the core of the service, and we explained to the courts that, look, this aspect has never been highlighted. My product is completely different. It is not what would have been projected before, my lords or your honors. So that aspect again becomes very important. So if there is a case against you, your task is very, very difficult. Facts become even more important, and you need to find out ways to distinguish the facts. Or if that cannot be done, then to show that the decision rests on some facts which were not demonstrated properly. And for that purpose, you need to come out with greater research on technical literature, on expert certificates, on commercial understanding, on trade understanding, etc., etc., etc. There can be 2,000 things which you may need to demonstrate. So I have already informed you that whatever we have discussed earlier, that identify if GSTN is functioning beyond the law, CBIC instructions are oppressive to the assessee, any rule is beyond the act. Yes. So now this issue again becomes very important. I had touched upon the circulars, where I stated that if the circulars are against the law, but there may be cases where the provisions are against the law. And let me give you examples. If you see Rule 89, you would see that Rule 89 talks about credit of inputs and input services. Whereas Section 16 of the IGST Act talks about unutilized input tax credit. So in some case, client may be having huge amount of input tax credit in relation to capital goods, which he is unable to take. There you may be required to agitate that issue before the High Court. So for that, you need to identify in advance, are there any provisions of law which are against the statute, or law means rules against the statute, or is there any provision of law which is contrary to the Constitution of India? For example, let me tell you one provision which I feel is wholly absurd. It says that unless the supplier pays the tax within so and so period, the buyer is required to reverse the credit. I don't think there is any rational relationship of the provision and the object it seeks to achieve. What does it seek to achieve? I fail to completely understand. Is it a GST law, or is it a law relating to recoveries for the buyers and the sellers? So therefore, one may say that this provision does not gel with the GST scheme. And the GST law is basically to charge tax and provide credit. And ultimately, the Supreme Court has held that if a provision is manifestly arbitrary, so if he has paid the tax, I cannot get the credit because I have not paid to him. And in many cases, what happens is, I as a receiver, we have entered into an arrangement where I'm not required to pay to him within 6 months or 3 months, whatever is the period provided. So in those cases, you may be at the very outset, you may not require to answer that notice to the authority. What will the authority do? He is bound by the statute. So in that case, you need to find out, is it an issue where the rule or the section violates the constitutional provision? And let me give you an example. This is how it all started. You would all remember that when Raheja decision came, which held that works contractors are liable to VAT. Works contractors anyways are liable to VAT, but they said that builders are works contractors. This matter went on to the larger bench of the Supreme Court, and ultimately in 2013, Honorable Mr. Justice Lodha, as he then was, sitting in larger bench, he held that no, Raheja was absolutely correct, and works contractors includes builders also. What if they also supply land along with their construction, but nonetheless they provide construction? Therefore, they are liable to sales tax. Now, this seems to be the end of the matter. Everyone is required to pay tax, and huge demands in Haryana VAT. If a builder was having a turnover of 100 crores, like he was having land, building, so whatever he sold, he got 100 crores. There were demands of 20 crores, 25 crores, fancy demands, because the authorities thought that they are now completely free to bulldoze and to do whatever they want to. Now, at that moment, it became very important to find out whether there is in fact the section and the rule in place under the act to charge the builders. All right, constitutionally, a builder may be a works contractor, but the statute has to translate that. And at that moment, we found out that Haryana VAT does not have proper and adequate provisions for charging builders, and therefore, at the notice stage itself, challenge was made to the rules and the provisions of the Act. If we would have gone through the assessment stage, huge demands would have been created. And if we would have gone by the appellate stage, many of the demands would have been recovered. But by identifying the challengeable provision at that stage, we were able to stop the department at the notice stage itself, and ultimately the court quashed those rules. So what I'm trying to suggest is that even under GST, there are several places where the act or the rules or the instructions on which the department is relying are not as per the standard laid down either by the constitution or in case of rules or circulars by the act. They are beyond the act. Look at the builder's deduction of 1/3. They are giving under the notification that land would always be 1/3. This is all. This is not what is authorized under the act. Says land is to be excluded. If land is to be excluded, how can you tax land by excluding only 1/3? Who gave you this power? So this notification seems to be wholly against the law. I'm giving you examples. Let's not get into merits. What I'm trying to say is, in such like cases, if you receive notices, file writ petitions. That's why we need to identify what are the infirmities which may be in the notice relatable to infirmities in the derivative. So notice is a derivative either of the instruction, circular, rule, act. Can we challenge that? If we can, and if we think we can be successful in drawing a strategy around it, figure that out. And in fact, that paves the way for development of law. So but let me tell you one more thing. As I mentioned in the beginning, if a rule has come, don't rush to challenge it in the high courts. There is a new tendency which I am seeing. As soon as a rule comes, people directly rush to the court without even thinking what its implication would be. And either they suffer an order against them, or they take the court into a completely different dimension where the court is unable to understand what are the facts in which it would really pinch. So today, the time has come where the courts have to be demonstrated. It is to be demonstrated to the courts that what is the effect of the provision is completely arbitrary. Its result is wholly absurd. For example, the provision where they deny credit if the other person has not filed his returns and all that, because it is not coming in your 2A, there is some restriction, etc. Now, the principal reason for it, because they are quarterly dealers. So this becomes absolutely absurd. It becomes completely contrary to known provisions of equity, equality, and non-absurdity. So state action has to be rational. It cannot be completely irrational. So here it is not about ITC being a right or not being a right. It's about rationality and irrationality. So, and it's about treating unequals as equal or equals as unequal. So therefore, we need to be very careful in what kind of facts we need to challenge these provisions. That also is extremely, extremely important. So on these basis, you can figure out, and one or two more things. Sometimes what happens is that the authority who is issuing the notice, that authority has completely no jurisdiction to issue it, because now there is a concept of assessing authority, there is a concept of proper officer. Proper officers are to be notified by the board as per section 2, subsection 91. Now, whether that particular officer has that kind of an authority or not, if you find he does not have, then it's a case of patent lack of jurisdiction. There again, why to subject myself to the authority who does not have jurisdiction? This is one of the principal grounds which has been held to be available to a necessity to go to the writ court under Whirlpool's decision. And we all know that, I need not repeat it. In some of the cases where an authority is acting wholly beyond the statutory limitation period, or in some cases where it is acting wholly beyond unreasonable period. So sometimes periods are not given. He is issuing notices after 10 years, adjudicating after 15 years. These are all cases where why do I subject myself to an authority? I would simply go to the court and say this is all unreasonable, or it is all beyond jurisdiction, depending upon what kind of a provision, etc. So all these things we need to, as a step, follow in every case of a notice. We have to be very careful while examining what steps to be next taken in case of a notice. And in fitting cases, wherever we feel writ petitions are to be filed for determining constitutional and pure legal questions, so that they do not enter. Because once they enter into your territory, they get information, they prepare orders against you, fancy demands are drawn, all becomes very difficult for the businesses. So sometimes they are to be stopped at the threshold. So this is the identification of where to stop them by way of writ petitions. And as I mentioned, before writ petitions, you may be required to file certain representations to the relevant authorities, because many times the court would say, have you brought these facts to the knowledge and information of the respondents? So why not? Let's do it beforehand. We should tell them beforehand. And one more thing, dear friends, that whenever writ petitions are filed at notice stage, generally there is nothing to lose. If you are able to show that they are not acting in accordance with law, either you get a positive order or you get a direction to the authority to consider your grounds. In that itself sometimes becomes a very important direction. If your grounds themselves are considered, if reference of the circulars which may be in your favor, reference of decisions which may be in your favor may be considered, and the High Court may direct them to consider the grounds and pass a reasoned order. Because sometimes you may be able to demonstrate to the court that, look, they are not passing reasoned orders, they are issuing notices bereft of any details, etc., etc. The courts many times pass orders that let them, after hearing the party and after considering the submission, pass a reasoned order. Then the authorities sometimes find it very difficult to wriggle out of the discussion that you make. Sometimes the court also orders them to decide the jurisdictional grounds, because many times when you raise jurisdictional ground, like you do not have authority, there is no instruction allowing you, etc., etc., the authorities simply do not answer that, or they say, no, I have authority, and they do not deal with your instruction. But when you go to the High Court saying that, look, he is issuing me a show cause notice, the High Court may ask them to file a reply, and do not find substance in their reply, they may either quash it, or in some cases they may say that let the authority decide the jurisdictional issue after properly examining the case put forward by the assessee. So all these things and many things more can be raised in case of writ petitions. So it is very, I would say it's an expertise, and it's after a lot of practical training in the courts that you really learn as to when writ petitions are to be filed and what exact reliefs, etc., are to be sought in the writ petitions. But these are few pointers which I wanted to show to you, and where writ petitions may prove to be a very useful right which an assessee has under the law. Wherever his fundamental rights are being affected, you definitely have remedy by way of filing a writ petition. So all those cases where there is a trampling of justice, you are able to show that there is something which is manifestly arbitrary, grossly wrong. But those touchstones are not, these are not just the words. We need to understand that in the real world scenario, which cases are to be considered as grossly, manifestly arbitrary, because every illegality is not grossly and manifestly arbitrary. All these things we need to consider. So this is what I was mentioning that we need to consider. The next thing is, yes, these are the orders which I was referring to, that they have to be quasi-judicial authorities, are to be left with their decision-making authority. Board cannot issue guidances, etc., for interfering with the same. This you can read. I am not getting too much into it. These are all circular relating 4-5 important decisions. I am now coming to where I decide to file reply to show cause notice. I want to lay out some checklist, a small practical guidance which I could gather of years. This may be useful to you in adding to whatever you may be following today. And you may again add your own checklist to these few basic points. So the first thing is that the allegations that are leveled in the show cause notice must be rebutted. And I learned from one of my clients who used to write that we do not admit this, we do not admit this. He used to say this to every line. So the learning is that in law, when the matters are contested, one should not accept the stand which is taken by the other side. I have seen that, for example, anti-profiteering authority, a person wrote to them that yes, whatever profiteering you have derived, I will pay this and close the matter. And ultimately, you know what happened? It was not closed. All other cases were opened saying that you yourself have admitted profiteering. He admitted profiteering not because he wanted to admit it. He admitted because he thought it's a small amount. Let me close it. Let me do my business. But by accepting that, what happened? He invited the wrath of National Anti-Profiteering Authority, who used to quote his own letter every time and open all the cases against him. So it's cardinal in law. Unless you want to follow a provision like 73.3 used to be there in service tax, now also there is, I think, 73.5 or 6 something, which says that you pay the amount with interest and the show cause notice would come to an end. Unless you are following that kind of a path, don't accept, deny. It's very important to rebut. So please rebut. Second, in your pleadings or in your replies, it is of foremost important that whatever facts you have gathered in the course of your discussion with the client, put them forth, put them to the authority. Tell them these are the facts. If they are saying this is textile or this is not textile, tell them why it's textile. Give them complete details. Tell them what do. You say, we buy the cloth, on the cloth we coat, after coating this happens, then it is wrapped, it is sold in the cloth market, they use like this, affix certificates, affix the product, what is made out of it, so that you can prove that it still is a textile. They are saying it's not textile. You have to prove from facts that it's a textile. Put your facts in detail, put your learnings in detail. So what is very important is to create a factual foundation which can, on which your case can rest. So the factual foundation is the most important part of the reply. The third is, whatever action they are taking, as I mentioned, you would have by now read the provisions of law, circulars and rules. Why the action proposed is not maintainable, be very clear. Give a pointed reply, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why registration cannot be cancelled? So let us say registration can be cancelled if 6 returns are not filed. So if 6 were not filed, file 2 returns, give them a reply that please find attached those returns. Now only 4 are pending, so you have no jurisdiction to cancel. Be very clear on what you are saying. Attach documents. Your pleadings should be very, very, very clear. There should not be any golmole in that. So be very pointed that this is why I am saying this. They say there is undervaluation. You tell them this is the evidence which I am adducing. There is no undervaluation. So whatever action, or you say that you are not the authority who can take this action. Valuation issues, only AC can raise. You are superintendent, you can't raise. Example, I am just giving you an example. So all those things, why the action proposed cannot be taken, directly answer that. All the grounds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Remember, if the matter goes to the Supreme Court would ask you, where did you take this ground? And if they do not decide your ground, in the appeal take that ground that I took it, I pleaded it, I argued it, they have not decided it. If you don't say that, they would say, all right, you have mentioned in your appeal grounds, but where have you argued this? Mention it in the appeal that I argued, but because I cannot have in-camera recording, so I can only say that I argued it. So say it on the piece of paper, say it. After the show cause notice reply, file a written submission. If there is anything left, file an additional submission. Second written submission, third written submission, but put everything at the notice and notice reply stage. Don't leave anything. If they ask you any additional question, put it on record. Put everything on record, whatever can be useful at a later stage in time. So be very, very vigilant at the time of filing the reply. I will give you 1 or 2 examples on this part. In the prayer clause, specifically ask for hearing. If you don't ask, courts have many times taken a stand that you have never asked for it, therefore hearing is not required. And in section 75, you would find that they say that you would have asked, then he will give you. So please always ask the opportunity of hearing. Then, in case there is violation of principle of natural justice, detail that, and in the notice also say that provide us with the relevant documents. If there is jurisdictional issue, say in the prayer, decide jurisdictional issue before proceeding further. Or don't proceed on merits unless you provide me the documents that you have relied upon. How do I reply? Mention in the ground, how do I reply if I do not have proper facts? Give me the facts. In the prayer, you say, don't proceed unless the facts are provided to us. So all these things, we need to be very clear what are we asking from the authority, what are we asking the authority to do. Let me give you an example. In case of RBI matters, there is a net own fund requirement under the RBI Act. And RBI Act says that you have to have that NOF requirement by a particular date. 2016 or something was that NOF was required to be completed, 2016 or 17. Now notices were sent out by RBI to the NBFCs that you do not fulfill the requirement of NOF. Now one reply, I am telling you a representative reply. We request you to grant us 5 more months to complete it. Thanking you. This is the reply. No hearing sought for. He does not look at his facts. When later on facts are seen, it is found that actually he had already complied with that requirement. Or he does not put forth any problem that he might be facing at the show cause notice stage. Simply saying, give us 5 more months. In such like circumstances, the courts have said neither you have asked for the hearing, nor you have explained anything. So what do we do? You admit, you have yourself admitted that you have not fulfilled. Please don't file such like perfunctory replies. They are suicidal. When you go through the facts, many times you are able to either demonstrate that, look, I have fulfilled the requirement. Or you may be able to demonstrate that requirement have been fulfilled, but technically there is some problem and we are doing in the process of doing it, and you will be able to tell it what was the problem. There may be problems in the board, there may be problems in the financial market, there may be problems in the regulatory issues, there may be problems with the management, many things may be there, which you may be able to point out and ultimately grant us a hearing. So please notice that reply to show cause notices, they are the primary and principal requirement. It is the basic document on which your rights would be adjudicated. So there is a notice, you have to reply to that. These two are the basic documents on which the whole proceedings would then continue. And these are the 2 most vital documents. So as I mentioned, it's very vital to prepare a comprehensive show cause notice reply containing facts, rebuttals to their allegations, grounds stating why the proposed action is not tenable in facts and in law, and a clear-cut prayer saying that this is what should be done in the facts of this case. This, according to me, is the process which may be followed. Of course, there may be subject to improvisations, subject to changes, subject to additions, deletions, improvements. Now, the last topic for today, which is about summons. Let me cover it in 3, 4, 5. So this is also a part of it. One more thing which I mentioned was show cause notice reply may not have case laws, but you may later on at the time of hearing give those case laws. That's all. So anyhow, next the section 70 relating to summons. That was also a part of our topic. 1 or 2 important things which I would like to highlight. Practically, the power to inquire is given a wide meaning by the judicial forums. Judicial fora, they treat power to inquiry as an important right of the officials to maintain the sanctity and the authority of law. Therefore, we need to be very careful when summons, etc. are issued. One, we need to understand that for the purpose of section 70, the central law says that superintendent is the proper officer, and once superintendent is the proper officer, as per section 5.2, his superiors also are proper officer, they can issue summons. But the requirement of section 70 is that summons shall be issued to a person whose attendance he considers necessary. Now, who has to consider it necessary? The person issuing the summons. So his wisdom cannot be substituted by a court or by some other person, unless either it is shown to be malified or it is shown to be completely extraneous. Extraneous means somebody has paid him the money to summon the other person. Is extraneous or completely irrelevant. What he is asking is not relevant to the person. For that purpose, there is no remedy going directly to the court. First of all, you need to put it very clearly to the summon issuing authority that the information that you are asking for is with some other person and present that person. Either he appears in person or he, with his authority from the company, say, I am the relevant person, please raise questions on me, or please issue notice, let me know when I should appear and I will give all the information. So the attitude of the assessee while appearing in the summons has to be cooperative, because he's a law-abiding citizen. At the same time, even though the officer has a lot of power, the power is not uncanalized. If he, let us say, still he pressurizes that only the MD should come, then a second letter can go. That the information that you are asking for, which you have stated, because the law says that if he is asking for a document, he has to very clearly say what kind of document. And in case he is asking for attendance of a person for giving evidence, then of course he is not required. He can call the MD. He can ask certain questions. But if his questions relate to, for example, GST, then the MD can write a letter, or at the time of appearance in the statement, MD can ask that these GST related issues I do not, neither I decide nor do I deal with these. He is the proper person. Therefore, I am sending him. All the questions relating to GST, he may say, I am not the relevant person, I am not the relevant person. If he still insists that for questions relating to GST, you have to come, then definitely no authority is beyond the majesty of law. If he is acting in a manner where it is clear on record that his attendance is not necessary, but the attendance of the other person is relevant, then after making out a proper case, definitely you can have protection from the higher courts only after you have adequately informed the other party, adequately cooperated and supported with the law enforcing authorities. So that's an important point which I wanted to point out in this case. I think apart from that, one thing which you may notice is that because they refer to the provisions of CPC, in CPC it is required that wherever the document is required, personal attendance is not necessary. If you file the document, that's the complete, that is something that you have fulfilled the requirement of the summon. So this is one more additional thing which I wanted to point out. With that, I would give it back to Archana ji. I think if there are any questions, we can take those.
Thank you, sir. It was quite insightful. Thank you very much. So there are some few questions that I would like to take with you.
Yeah.
First question is, sir, please let us know whether authority of a different state can issue a notice in case of e-way bills on the same way, on the way of vehicle from state where I am registered, and how such cases are to be dealt with. In case of e-way bills, different state officers issues notices. How should such cases be handled?
सूरज जी, मैंने ये स्पेसिफिक्स में नहीं देखा है इशू, तो मैं इसकी स्पेसिफिक्स में नहीं कुछ बोलूंगा. लेकिन अगर किसी भी अथॉरिटी को अपनी अथॉरिटी, अपनी जुरिसडिक्शन में, ऑर्डिनरीली व्हाट इज द लॉ, इफ एन अथॉरिटी फाइंड्स आउट दैट he needs certain information for the purpose of ensuring that the law under which he is functioning, there are certain violations or some inquiry investigation is required on that count, he can definitely question you. And if you notice section 70, specifically section 70, it uses the expression person, any person. So person does not mean a person registered with that authority. Whosoever, in fact, if you see CPC, you would find that complete strangers can be called. If the court feels that he may be relevant for giving or tendering any evidence, a complete stranger may also be called. So ultimately, it is upon the authority to make up his mind that who may be relevant for tendering the evidence. So I'm not very sure whether it can, the authorities in other states can be stopped because we are not registered with them. Quite difficult, but I have not examined this issue exactly as it is.
The next issue is, under what situations are there some specific situations where assessee can receive notices from officer other than jurisdictional officer? Are there some specific situations?
As I mentioned, if you see section 70, it itself says, in fact, let me read that out because I think that would be relevant to your question. It says, the proper officer under this act shall have power to summon any person. He may not even be an assessee under any act. Leave aside assessee under his jurisdiction. He may not be an assessee under any act. Whose attendance he consider necessary. So the requirement is whose attendance he consider necessary. If he consider anybody's attendance necessary, he can call any person. He may call a transporter, he may call a driver, he may call the padosi of a person whom he thinks that he is involved in some kind of forgery, some kind of evasion, and he thinks that his neighbor can also give some answers, so he can call him. But then there is the law then gives some parameters of reasonableness, that look, till this extent any reasonable person would consider that yes, the exercise of the power is bona fide, and beyond this there is no answer to it. Why are you calling the padosi again and again? So then it has to end somewhere. So that line, however, can never be told in black and white. This is the line where he has to stop. So yes, there can be cases where authorities of different states definitely can have jurisdiction over the people of different state.
And it has to be handled in the respective state only.
Yes, definitely you have to go to that authority. But yes, one thing is that if one authority has begun the investigation on a particular point, then there are decisions of the courts based upon the provisions of our law that then the parallel authority should not start. Center has started, the state should not start. State has started, center should not start. So one authority at a time, please, because both of them are authorities for him. But if you are talking about an authority somewhere else asking information in respect of some, for example, in fake invoices, there may be an authority inquiring fake invoices issued by a person in Haryana, and he finds out that the trail is throughout the country. Then definitely he can issue notices to people sitting in the other places. I don't see any jurisdictional bar in that case. I'm not too sure about that. So all these issues we have to be very, very careful. We have to go through the whole trail of provisions which he is attracting or under which he is acquiring the jurisdiction. So my answer to both these questions that you asked is based upon some general observations. I am not giving any definitive answer to these specific fact-based situations where we need to examine. As I mentioned earlier, I am a student of classical law where we say that please read the relevant provision at that relevant time. That I feel is the way in which we should proceed.
So it also happens that
See?
it also happens that is there someone in no. It also happens that DGGI anti-evasion is taking up the case and jurisdiction investigation also starts along with. So how should we handle this? DGGI,
Say that again. I say that again. I can't hear you.
DGGI, Director General of Intelligence, they're also taking up the case, and the jurisdiction officers also starts with the case, the investigation. So can they go hand in hand? Can they both?
Look, as I mentioned, if the same investigation is being done by more than one authority, then you should write letters to both of them saying that you decide inter se who want to make the inquiry or investigation. Most of the cases when DGGI is involved, the local authorities drop the case or stop the case. They don't proceed with it if you write a reply. So if you write to them with proper notice, etc., issued by the other authority, they generally stop. This has been my experience. But in case they still both of them want to proceed and they are going beyond particular limit of questioning, then definitely you have the right to knock the doors of the constitutional courts and tell them that, look, I am not shying away from inquiry or investigation, but after all, I am also a businessman. You can't tie me up with different people asking for the same information. In that case, I've seen courts willing to interfere and ask from the respondents that which authority they would prefer that the investigation be made. That part, I think, is quite doable.
Also, I would like to ask one question. In case of Saman, I have seen that one of the clients went for personal hearing, and he was tortured physically also. He was hit on his face or some kind of. And what they do immediately after the investigation, after the meeting, they took him to the hospital and get a medical report that he was not hit or some, because there is no mark for that. There is no marks for that. So how far this is legal and how should we handle such kind of situations?
Look, it is completely illegal. No authority, howsoever high he is placed, has the right to take law in his own hands. So if you see GST law, let's assume that a person has issued fake invoices. What is the punishment in the law? He can be imprisoned for a particular period of time depending upon the monetary limits, right? Nowhere it is stated that the officer has got the right to slap. So therefore, if the officer is slapping, then he is separately getting himself into an offense which is covered under IPC. If there is any threat to physical violence on part of the officers, then the best way is immediately call the police, dial number 100 and call the police and tell them that you have to ask questions in front of the police. So that is one thing. Secondly, only when we allow them to overpower us, they overpower us. And if for some reason they do like that, immediately write a complaint as soon as you are out to the higher ups. But I have seen that people do not do it. If you do it, it is taken extremely seriously and it is taken, a lot of action is taken. You immediately write to the DG, you immediately write to the chairman CBIC, you immediately write to your jurisdictional commissioner, and you write to the police station also that this is what happened. And you also mention that who were the witnesses of this. Name them, put the facts on record, and I'm telling you, they would be in great difficulty. No one has the power to take law in their own hands. If somebody has done some wrong, he will be punished by the court of law, not by the officer who is inquiring. The biggest difficulty in India is these people behave as if they are dealing with criminals. Not even criminals are dealt with like the way they are dealing with the people who they apprehend as being financial defaulters. So that is, but the problem is that we are unable to face them in the correct perspective. We are unable to tell them that these are our rights, and we are unable to take real care of the interest of, because a person is sometimes frightened about the action which they may take. And there are some draconian provisions in the law, like arrest in case where the amount exceeds 5 crores in specified offences. Because otherwise, wherever the client's offence is less than 5 crores, you would see that these people are unable to take any real action. Wherever the amount exceeds 5 crores in respect of those offences which are specified, they really lead to such like actions of slapping and this thing. So I think this it has to be dealt with seriously, provided the client is willing to take the issue seriously. Otherwise, you think, all right, once an insult in a closed room, let me somehow be saved from whatever I have done. So both the things are there, but definitely in law, they have no such right.
One of the questions is whether compliance which is illegal cannot be replied, considering the risk of section 160. Whether compliance of notice which is illegal cannot be replied.
Illegal in the sense, give me some example.
It's a general question. I think so. It was written by someone.
So, for example, if there is a notice, look, we have to understand one thing. Let's say there is a notice issued after the statutory period which is provided in law. Let's say after 6 years, a notice is actually issued after 10 years. You don't reply it, and he passes an assessment order. If you don't challenge the assessment order, that will be confirmed against you, and he can make recoveries against that assessment order. So you always need to take the notices and orders very seriously. You cannot sit on them. You can write to them that it is illegal.
Okay.
So section 160 or no 160, in fact, on pari materia provisions under income tax, it has been held that wherever the jurisdictional requirements are not met, it cannot be cured by a provision like section 160 in the GST law. So, for example, an assessment initiated against a company which has already merged into another company and therefore lost its identity, etc. All these cases, it has been held that such are the fundamental foundational defects. These are not actually defects. They are fundamental foundational illegalities, fundamental foundational voids which cannot be filled by a mechanism like section 160. But we always need to remember that notices and orders that are issued, even though they are illegal, are to be contested and they are not to be avoided. The worst policy today, many times I find that people suggest that don't file a reply, don't appear, don't give him the evidence, let us file a complaint of this person somewhere, let us do this, let us do that. That is the worst way of spoiling your case. Whatever information is being sought for, whatever question is being raised before you, you need to answer that. Either you need to say that you have no jurisdiction or no business. So let us say there is a PN in a government office. He has no jurisdiction to ask you questions on your assessment of tax. So you can always tell him that, look, you have your own jurisdiction, I respect you, but you cannot ask me this question. You have no right. You have no business. It's a pure legal answer. You need to give that. But you say, I will not even reply to it. That's not an answer.
Next question is, for a short payment of import of goods. Who is the proper officer to issue this notice?
Say that again.
In case of short payment of IGST on import of goods, who is the proper
Ah.
officer to issue show cause notice? A
Customs.
officer or a
Customs.
custom officer? Yeah.
It is a customs only because it is levied and imposed under customs law only.
So what right now? What is the process for claiming ITC in Tran 1? As same is gray area right now. Whether brand equity judgment is applicable to all the states.
देखिए ये एक बहुत ही प्रॉब्लमैटिक इशू है आज की डेट में. जिन लोगों ने 30 जून से पहले कोई स्टेप नहीं लिया, those who have not taken any step, I think they have completely missed the bus. Ultimately, those who have taken some steps are before some court, etc. Only they will be able to get the refuge of the decision which is given by the courts, because otherwise, how would a person be able? Let us take it takes 5 years for the Supreme Court to decide. By then, the rights would have crystallized for everyone except those whose matters are pending. So either a person took the credit in pursuance of brand equity, took the credit. Actually, he took the credit, and in the manual GSTR, this thing, what is that called, Tran 1, and then showed it in his 3B, wrote to the department saying I've done it, and then department starts some investigation, department starts some issuing some notice, etc., which would culminate into issuance of show cause notice. Therefore, the matter would be adjudicated. If ultimately decided by Supreme Court in favor, they can take. Or else, people would have filed petitions. They are pending in the courts. When they are pending in the courts, the court ultimately, whatever decide, would be applicable to them also. But those who have done nothing, definitely they're, according to me, they have missed the bus. Now, in whichever state they may be, if they are following any of these two routes, I think they would be able to take the benefit of the Supreme Court. Because ultimately, the Supreme Court decision would be for all the states. It would not be for one state.
Now, thank you very much for handling queries so easily. Thank you very much. And I would like now Vedantji to take the vote of thanks.
Before his vote of thanks, allow me to thank CGPI, Suraj ji, Madam Archana ji, your whole team. I thank you for inviting me on this forum. I thank you for giving me this opportunity to interact with some of the most wonderful professionals of the whole of the country. I am really enlightened with the questions. The topic indeed was very interesting and also very close to my heart. So I thank you for giving me this opportunity from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I, Vedant Swaroop, on behalf of CGPI team members and participants, would really like to thank you for sharing your knowledge in such a wonderful manner and enlightening the whole audience. I'm sure we will be able to deal with department correspondence in a much more efficient and effective manner from now onwards. Also, you brought some judicial precedents into our knowledge that we can use while dealing with department harassments and correspondences. So thank you so much for that and taking out time from your busy schedule to help us. Thank you, sir.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.